everybody. My name is Brandon Jones. I serve as the Associate Director for Student Learning and Development in Housing and Dining here at the University of Texas at Austin. And we want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in this evening. And we've got an exciting panel here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. But throughout the course of the event, if you have any questions that you would like asked, please make sure that you put those in the Q&A box, and then also the chat is open as well, but we'll be responding to the questions that are open in the chat section. And so first, I want to introduce Dr. Tracy A. Lowe. Dr. Tracy Lowe is the Assistant Director of Assessment for the Institute for Urban Policy Research and Analysis, also known as IUPRA, here at UT Austin. Her research focuses on the experiences of Black students in higher education, with a particular focus on activism experiences of Black women graduate students. Additionally, her research interests include issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. Tracy holds a doctorate in educational leadership and policy from the University of Texas at Austin, a master's degree in educational administration, and a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies, both from Texas A&M University. Welcome, Dr. Lowe. And next, we'll introduce Dr. Peniel E. Joseph. Dr. Joseph is the founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the University of Texas at Austin. He holds a joint professorship appointment at the LBJ School of Public Affairs as the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values and in History at the College of Liberal Arts. He received a BA from SUNY at Stony Brook and a Ph.D. from Temple University. He's also received a fellowship from Harvard University's Charles Warren Center, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and the Ford Foundation. Dr. Joseph serves as a frequent commentator on race and social justice, and his work has also appeared in multiple national publications, and he's authored award-winning books, Waiting Till the Midnight Hour, A Narrative History of Black Power in America, Dark Days, Bright Nights, From Black Power to Barack Obama, and Stokely, A Life. He recently published The Sword and the Shield, The Revolutionary Lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Peniel E. Joseph and Dr. Tracy A. Lowe. Dr. Lowe, you will have 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll give Dr. Joseph 10 minutes as well. And then we'll open up for questions. So Dr. Lowe.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Let's see if this screen share thing works. Let's see. All right. So I want to say, first of all, that I'm honored to be speaking to you all tonight. This is a topic for which I have great curiosity. And it's actually the foundation of my dissertation research. So I just explored the activism of Black women graduate students, and I really hope to continue exploring this topic of activism and advocacy in the future. So the strategies and ideas that I present in this presentation, I want to just first say thank you to the participants in my study, because they have inspired a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say tonight. But they're all from my research experiences and just working on a range of projects. So I hope that the information that I provide will be helpful and useful for you. So I want to first start out by saying, when we're thinking about strategies for advocacy, the first thing I like to tell people is to reflect on what advocacy means for you. Now, of course, Google has its own definition of what advocacy means. You have public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. And then good old Merriam-Webster will say the act or process of supporting a cause or a proposal. However, taking the time to reflect on what advocacy means to you is important, because again, words and concepts have different meanings to different people. And so when I think about conversations that I had with individuals from my dissertation study, when we sat down, they hadn't really taken the time to reflect on what activism meant to them and how they defined the terms for themselves. And at some points, defining a term was difficult, because activism, again, it has a lot of different meanings and connotations. So reflection is important, because it can help you not only define advocacy, but people can often have specific ideas of what it means to be an advocate or certain expectations of what that is. So some more traditional ways that may come to mind could be protests, could be formal political engagement, legislative action, and policymaking. However, there are a range of ways that people can participate in advocacy. So if you think opinion pieces, I know Dr. Joseph has done a lot of great op-eds. These are also ways that you can think about being creative about getting your ideas out to the socials and society world. And also is a form of activism and advocacy that people may not think about. So another thing to consider when we're in discussions of advocacy is knowing your why. So defining what advocacy means to you is important, but reflecting on the why of your advocacy is just as important. So why are you willing to do the work? Why is it meaningful? So if that's personal experiences, if these are interests that you have, or just burning questions or desires that you've had in the past, just considering all of these and how they factor into the why of what you do is important. What are the outcomes you'd like to come from your efforts? So your why is kind of what grounds you and provides a foundation for your work. And it can really serve as a compass for you in terms of where you place your energy or the skills or the efforts that you put into any type of advocacy that you do. And then just another thing, finding spaces for learning and engagement. So I don't think anybody is born knowing how to advocate or do advocacy work. It might be something that you're really interested in, something that you see family members do, but it's definitely a learning process. And so if there's an issue or a topic that you're concerned about and that you want to address, just finding those spaces to learn more about that topic or just issue is important. And again, just thinking about the conversations that I've had in the past, there are people who kind of, grow up understanding that there's injustices or things that just aren't right. They have personal experiences that may have kind of seemed a bit off, or just different personal experiences that have kind of led them to just evaluate like what's really happening in the context of the situation. But they couldn't find the language for it or articulate what was happening. So what they found themselves doing was just being in spaces where they could learn more and be around others who shared the same interests and the same interest in advancing causes or advocating for certain causes. So when you're able to find these spaces to engage with others, it can really help you learn the landscape of advocacy and how you can contribute your skills and knowledge in different ways. And I'll use myself as an example. In the community work that I do, I have to recognize as a researcher that I bring a certain lens and kind of get reflective on what my positionality is. And thinking about, well, what are my blind spots? What are some assumptions that exist for me? And the only way I've kind of learned to kind of filter through this process is because I've engaged in spaces and community work where people can kind of show me. You have your gatekeepers to communities who may be mistrustful of research, understanding who's at the table and how to create this atmosphere of collaboration and inclusion. So just finding those spaces for learning and engagement is really important. And advocacy, a lot of us are very passionate about the work. If you're on this, in this conversation with us tonight, you're probably part of the group that really, really feels advocacy is important. And sometimes we all want to save the world 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. However, burnout is real, and that's just human nature for any topic. So there's a certain time where individuals who I've spoken to, young and old, who have come to a point where they realized they needed to take a break. And this is really when they had to kind of start focusing on what sustainable advocacy meant for them in the context of their lives, in that moment in time. And it's always important to consider your own mental and physical health, because that in itself is a form of advocacy for yourself and your community. Because as they say, if you're sick, then you can't do things for other people. So just be aware and kind of be reflective of where you are and how your body and mind and physical health is, because advocacy work can be really hard and frustrating at times, especially when it seems change doesn't come, and it can be discouraging. So just recognizing that burnout is real and making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And then also, recognizing that your thoughts and perspectives will definitely change over time is something that I encourage people to do in terms of advocacy. Because as you continue in your advocacy work, your thoughts, reflections, opinions, and views, they'll all change, especially as you learn, you grow, and you move through different phases of life. So if necessary, you can always go back through what I kind of call this little cycle, and just take time to periodically reflect and say, okay, let me redefine what advocacy means for me in this moment in time. Let me redefine what my why is. Why am I doing this advocacy work? Why am I doing this particular project? Where can I find new spaces for learning? Because I'm always growing. I'm always understanding my biases. There are things that I don't know. So again, just kind of going back through this cycle and then doing self-checks to make sure that your advocacy is sustainable and that it's always really true to who you are in life. And then also just taking the skills and knowledge that you've gained and passing them on to others. I think that's a really important strategy when it comes to advocacy, because as you have these people who have kind of groomed you and trained you and helped you to get where you are in terms of advocacy and strategies, and just help you found the resources to support whatever cause it is. I always think it's really important for that element of reciprocity in terms of giving back to communities. And right now I'm specifically working on initiatives that provide community members with the opportunity to engage in this type of work and to be able to understand and recognize and kind of amplify their voices through providing them with tools and resources and knowledge. So that's the brief presentation that I have on thinking about advocacy and just strategies for advocacy. And I will try to find my thing to stop my share. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. Let me put my timer on. No, I'm gonna take this issue of advocacy from a different direction, a different lens. Certainly, in terms of resources on campus, I would be remiss if I didn't say the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. And we're one of the co-sponsors for this program. We have a partnership with Housing and Dr. Jones and you know, the work of Dr. Lowe. She's been one of our fellows. So I think you know, if people are interested at sort of the technical level of what can we do on campus in this social justice space, the CSRD has a lot of great resources. You know, I want to talk about what Martin Luther King Jr. Called a revolution of values. I think that one of the things that we're seeing, and we see it with Dante Wright, we see another 16-year-old was just shot by and killed by the Maryland police who had a pellet gun. You know, is this idea of a revolution of values, because we live in a, you know, extraordinarily sick society here in the United States and globally, right? So for those of us who are interested in human rights, in racial justice, in transforming the criminal justice system, abolishing prison, reimagining public safety or defund the police, however you want to call it, we have to see what are our values and not performative values, meaning, you know, there's a lot of performance out here in the United States, especially in the aftermath of last year and the death of George Floyd. But, you know, the true face of the country always reveals itself. And certainly our true face is January 6th and the white supremacist riot at the US Capitol. And our true face is the governor of Texas and what happened in the context of the winter storm and all of these lies. And our true face is really the face of white supremacy and racial slavery. It's really extraordinary. I'm working on a book right now on America's third Reconstruction. And when you read about the era of Reconstruction, you see how similar that era after racial slavery is to our own in very, very frightening and dangerous ways. So part of, I think, what Dr. King called us to do, but I think people like Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer, so many others, But this idea of a revolution of values is really to ask the why in a different way, right? So it's not just about sort of trying to shine your personal light. It's trying to think about how do you connect and view the world, right? We live in a world that absolutely hates poor people, hates Black people, hates trans and queer people, hates immigrants and Muslims and so many different people, Jews. And what are you going to do about that? And one, how do you feel about those people as well? So when Dr. King talked about revolution of values, he argued that was what it was going to take to try to build a beloved community that was free from violence, that was free from racism, that was free of economic injustice. And I think since King's assassination in 1968, I think we're all aware those things have proliferated. They've actually increased rather than decreased. So even as our technological prowess has increased globally, our humanity has actually decreased in significant proportion with that technological increase. And certainly the internet and social media have had profoundly negative effects on just our moral imagination here in the United States and globally. So I think when people are talking about social justice and talking about racial equity and talking about what are the resources, I think we have to think about internally, what are our values, and not values when people are looking, not values that people tweet about. I'm Generation X, and it's extraordinary how personal people's tweets become and sort of the performative nature of that. But what do we do when no one's looking, right? How do we treat our kids? How do we treat our loved ones? What do we say? What are we thinking when no one's looking? And I think that we have to sort of start there and certainly connect that with our policy advocacy and connect that with organizing. But we've, one of the things that Dr. King said near the end of his life was that the United States was facing, and the world was facing, the triple evils of militarism, racism, and materialism, right? And certainly a portion of that materialism now is this disconnect between, and everyone I think is connected here, disconnect with people's public selves and their private selves, right? And that disconnect is very, very worrisome, because even when some people perform, whether you want to call it allyship or any kind of social justice work, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going on in their private lives, and they personally believe this. And I think what King called us to do when he spoke about this revolution of values is really trying to create a more seamless public and private self in service of building that beloved community. So I would say, and I'd love to talk about this, I think that we can see that disconnect in all the violence that occurs in the United States, but especially violence that's directed against poor communities, certainly police and law enforcement violence. You see a young man, really a young man who was murdered last Sunday by Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis PD. And the officer said that they were going for their taser, and they shot him once and executed him in front of his girlfriend. He's 20 years old. We're never getting Dante right back. This is extraordinarily. This is extraordinary. This is unjust. This is evil. And what kind of society do we have, right? All of us who are connected to University of Texas, we say what happens here changes the world. How can the activism that we do, the scholarship, the research, but also the values we reflect, how can we do something that helps transform a world that is capable of doing that? And I think that's really, really important. And it's, at this point, it's bigger than sort of getting sort of the latest anti-racist book or something like that, right? Or attending a seminar or attending a webinar. because that's great, and it's a kind of contribution, but we need bigger, much more radical and revolutionary change, and certainly that change begins with us concomitantly, simultaneously with institutions and communities and networks. So I'll close by saying that I think that when it comes to, how are we supposed to be thinking about social justice in our own time, we have to become the values that we actually reflect and articulate, right? And so that means that for people who are saying they want to build the beloved community, you have to become certainly knowledgeable, but if justice is what love looks like in public, you have to be reflective of that, and you have to be bold and courageous, because we're really living in anti-human times. We're living in anti-Black times. We're living in extraordinarily retrograde times, and we can see that all around us. I mean, we can see that all around us. This last election didn't somehow save democracy. Democracy is faltering right before our very eyes. This last election didn't somehow prevent 37 million people a day from not eating in a nutritious way and being food insecure. So we're in an extraordinarily bleak time, and we need to own that too, even if we are hopeful, because the only way you can change what is happening is to actually confront it candidly, right? So these are not great times. This is not a high point in American history, even as some people will say there might be increasing consciousness about just the depth and breadth of the problems we have. But I do think that this idea of a revolution of values, where we think about dignity and citizenship in different ways, where we obviously stop not only killing and murdering Black people, but we allow a context for Black people and brown people and other people to actually flourish, and we invest, and we create a different kind of society. And we actually have different values than the values we have right now, because the values we have right now are those values of materialism and racism and militarism that really impact all structures and institutions in American society, and really reverberate very negatively back around the world. It's not just the Twin Cities, but this is happening right here in Austin, Texas. And so it really becomes, for those of us who are interested in creating that beloved community, we have to be able to participate in thinking about that revolution of values for ourselves, our families, our networks, and then think to ourselves, how can we transform policy, transform legislation, transform these structures of democracy in a different, new, exciting, innovative ways, in ways that haven't been done before ever, which is why we're locked in this cycle where history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes in unbelievably negative ways. So I'll close there, and definitely ready to have a great conversation with Dr. Lowe.
All right, so we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A box. And so one question came in that said, Dr. Lowe, would you mind talking more about some of the community work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so I'll start with what kind of resources, because there was a community course that I was engaged in creating for the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, but we were able to offer it to people across Central Texas. And so the idea of this course was to just be able to offer, again, when we say tools and resources, a lot of grassroots leaders sometimes don't have access to funding to be able to say, take a grant writing classes or different things like that. And so just looking at it through that lens, we offered a course that helped people to kind of take the ideas of the issues they had and create policy briefs and create policy publications, and to just think about things like where they could find and access data, where they could find and access information. And so it's those types of experiences that I really enjoy, because we're also working to create one that's about to launch in Houston. And I'm just really excited to see where that goes. But that one specifically, we've been kind of targeting like third ward and communities of color specifically in order, and we did community feedback. So we had a survey with community leaders. We did some focus groups, because in building the one in Houston, we really wanted to have the opportunity to ask them, what are the skills and knowledge that you feel that you need to advocate? So that was an important component of the work that we were doing. And from their feedback, a lot of them talked about the fact that they wanted to, again, the grant writing thing, how to like use social media for organizing and just different things like that. Because people would say, I use social media, but I always feel like I could use it in a better way to organize and to communicate. And so that's just an example of some of the community work that I've done that kind of involves just the providing resources and tools, because they're already doing the work. Like the work has already been done, even with or without this course. But just to be able to just give just some more energy to these campaigns in order for them to be these advocacy efforts for them to be successful. And that's just one of the examples. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. And both of you can answer this question. So when we talk about advocacy and activism, one of the things that often comes up, because we're in a social media generation, and some people are very critical on social media about other people's advocacy and activist efforts. So based on that, who gets to be an activist? Who gets to be the advocate? And both of you can answer that. But I know that's one that I know some of our students in one of our workshops I came from before I came in here had about advocacy and activism because of those reasons.
Well, I'll start. I think that, anybody can be an activist. I think that one of the things that we have to remember is that by the time we're in graduate school or undergrad or whatever, or professors, right? You're not necessarily a full-time 100% organizer. And there's a difference between sort of an organizer. I was on my first picket line over 40 years ago. My mom worked at a hospital in New York City, East 92nd Street for 40 years. And I was on attending protests and pickets all throughout my really childhood and then adolescence and high school in New York City. And so I thought I was at the time going to be a professional day-to-day organizer. I went to Stony Brook for that and talked to people about that. And I thought I was going to start by being a full-time teacher, and went to the Teacher Opportunity Corps. And I wanted to be part of the teachers union and teach Black students in New York City. So that's what my thing was gonna be. And lo and behold, I continued to be active, but I became a professor, right? And so I think sometimes people who are not full-time 100% organizers, some people say, well, you're not active unless you're doing that. And life doesn't work that way, So like we all can be very active wherever we are at, but we have to be humble too. So like if you're a student, if you're a young person, you've got to have humility and find out the story. I think one of the reasons I went to grad school was not because I thought I was smart. It was really the opposite. I went because I thought there was, even as my mom had gifted me with so much knowledge practically and intellectually, my Haitian mother, I thought there was so much I didn't know and didn't understand. And I was really interested in labor movements. I was interested in social justice movements. Sonia Sanchez is one of my mentors. So I became interested through both my mom and her in Black feminism, and Black feminism became one of my fields, of study, right? And so anybody can be an activist, but you've got to be willing to be humble and learn and remain a student, I would say. And I I definitely give all respect to 100% professional organizers, people who are saying like this is all they're doing and they're trying to raise money and different stuff. And I certainly don't pretend to be that, but we can all be activists. And I think that you being a scholar here at University of Texas or a researcher here at University of Texas, a lot of our scholarship is in service of activism, right? What Dr. Lowe is doing, what Dr. Jones does. So I do think it's very, very capacious, but you've got to have humility. I think one of the great things about Fannie Lou Hamer is that she teaches us, she's the voting rights activist from Ruleville, Mississippi, who was a sharecropper, who really becomes an activist starting in 1962 for the rest of her life. She dies in 1977 through the work of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who come to Ruleville, Mississippi. Septima Clark is another, and they provide a context for her to find her vocation as an activist and an organizer, right? Now, this Mrs. Hamer was what people would say was not formally educated, but she was brilliant and she was a genius, right? But she wasn't formally educated, and she gives this riveting testimony at the 1964 Democratic National Convention in New Jersey, Atlantic City, where she says that, is this America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, where we are beaten and threatened for trying to vote in the United States? Fannie Lou Hamer had been brutally beaten in Winona, Mississippi, by both white law enforcement, but they took her to a prison and forced Black prisoners to beat Mrs. Hamer for trying to register to vote. And I think when we understand the story of Fannie Lou Hamer, we are not going to be surprised by the racism we experience in Austin, by the racism we experience at University of Texas, by the white supremacist riot, January 6, 2021. This is an evil system. And the slave power in the United States that was supposedly defeated during the Civil War won the peace after the Civil War. That's why you can have Trent Lott in Mississippi. That's why you can have the governor in this state. These are all Confederates and white supremacists. And we have to say it loud and proud and speak the truth to our children. We have to speak the truth, right? And so, yes, you can be an activist. You can join this. This is a long road. This is a road for marathon and long distance runners. This is a race for long distance runners. And I definitely fear in this sort of look at me culture that we have, that people want a quick fix. They want 1 million followers. They want to be Amanda Gorman overnight. And it doesn't work like that. You know, and I love Amanda Gorman. I'm saying, like, I love that light that she shine, but everybody can't be that. It's just like Angela Davis. Everybody can't be her. So somebody has to be doing the work. So we have to be willing to be what? Foot soldiers, right? Women and men who are foot soldiers, and not everybody's going to get the praise and be the president, right? Right? When there's a social movement. So yes, everybody can be active.
Dr. Lowe.
I agree with everything that Dr. Joseph has said in terms of the criticism that part. I do, and I have heard that there are certain expectations that when, say, you call yourself an activist, you're kind of put on this pedal of, oh, I can do no wrong. And so there are actually people who kind of, you know, move away from that term of labeling themselves as an activist. And I do agree that everyone in their own ways can be an activist, can perform advocacy in terms of just across the spectrum, because again, scholar researchers, people organizing, it looks different in different ways. And I think because people may have a set perception of what activism is ingrained, and it's hard to kind of shift and move and redefine what activism is. And in these discussions about what activism is, I mean, there are spaces to do it, but really just getting down to the nitty gritty of like, what does it mean to be an activist? I think those are important for us to start having more because, you know, again, there are these expectations of people who look at you like, oh, you're just posting stuff on social media. That's not real activism. But again, those are organizing efforts that connect people who originally may not be able to find community in the spaces where they're at. So again, I think it's that reflection piece is really important. And I think because people can tend to move away from the term of being an activist, you know, that brings conversations of like, how are we framing this narrative of activism?
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Lowe. And that brings us to another question that is along that same line. This attendee, their question was regarding the performative nature of advocacy or activism. They said that they identify as a Hispanic woman and want to support their Black neighbors, but had a question about would wearing my Black Lives Matter t-shirt out and be seen as supportive, or would it be seen as performative? Because they said they feel like allies need to be visible, but they don't want it to be an empty gesture. What are you all's thoughts around that?
You're muted, Dr. Joseph.
Oh, thank you. I think it's fine to wear the shirt if you are connecting that shirt wearing to larger advocacy, whether that means you're investing in anti-racist organizations that are Black-led, you're putting some skin in the game, so to speak. So I think it's fine. But you know, in certain ways, depending on how people, it's like what Dr. Lowe was saying. I think even the label of activist, it's how you define it. Because I do think that the whole notion of hashtag activism, I wasn't a critic of that, because I thought that had its place, and I think it does have its place. I think where I get more critical on the internet is what we saw last year with the corporate hashtag activism. Okay, so I think that every American citizen has a right, if one of these murders or something moves you, and you say, look, I'm going to just post this stuff up, right? And in a way, you saw the NFL said Black Lives Matter, NASCAR, you know, banned the Confederate flag. So there was a lot of movement for change. But what you saw with the corporate activism and the donations to BLM is that once after the election, there's 250 voter suppression laws in 43 states, those same those corporations weren't saying anything about that, right? It really took Ken Chenault and 72 Black execs to come out with a statement March 31st in the New York Times, sort of giving a brief précis, a brief history of sort of voting rights activism and saying, this is wrong. And then you got Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, you got different people, Delta, Coca-Cola, saying, well, yeah, we're against voter suppression too. So I think the biggest performative thing has been the corporations. And it's also been our politicians, right? You know, because politicians sort of are looking where the wind blows, and that's, you know, that is what is to be expected, but we have to try to hold those folks accountable. And just because you say Black Lives Matter, you have to check the details and see what are the policies, what are the changes, transformations that have happened. And we have to hold ourselves accountable. That includes us, you know, UT. We have to hold each other accountable in this space.
All right. So along kind of connecting those, I'm sorry, Dr. Lowe, did you have something else you were going to add? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's well said.
Okay, I was about to say, I didn't mean to jump to that next question. We're getting some good questions over here in the Q&A box, so y'all keep them coming because these are really good. I want to talk about something, Dr. Joseph, that you had just mentioned in there regarding statements. How do we go beyond just issuing statements? Because I know I saw a lot of scholarship and a lot of social media activity in the last year regarding, you know, it's good to issue statements, now what? And then I know 2 days ago, somebody on social media was saying, hey, all of those committees and all of those statements and all of the purchasing of, you know, Ibram Kendi's book, among others, within the last year, where y'all at now kind of thing. So how do we go beyond just the issuing of statements to being more, to doing something beyond that?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think people are doing it. I think one of the things is there's an asymmetry between conventional politics and the social movements of this time, right? And this is what I mean. Conventional politics after 2020 will tell you, look, we want to turn that anger into votes. And one party, both parties actually did, both parties, Democrats and Republicans. Republican Party drew 11 million more people between 2016 and 2020, really remarkable, including in a place like Texas, drew more votes than they did in 2016. And the Democrats, though, they ended up drawing about 16 million more people. Okay, so that's what's happened. But when you see the result of that, including the tremendous work Stacey Abrams and Black women have done, both in BLM but also voting rights, it's asymmetrical in this sense. The passage of the pandemic bill is not enough, but it may be at the federal level all anyone's going to get, because democracy doesn't work here, right? It doesn't work here. So you can have one senator, whether that's Joe Manchin or somebody else, say that those 81 million votes don't matter because the system that we're in, House of Representatives, the US Senate filibuster, is a very antiquated system that's connected to that old US slave power, right? So in some ways, I do think sometimes activists and intellectuals are too hard on the people who want change because they're doing everything that they can do, right? And some of this includes where when we saw BLM protests last year, or you look at Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis, where people are saying, Biden saying, I feel for the family, no looting, right? Well, we have to look, what are you defining as looting? And who are the real victims of structural violence? Is it the people who are being shot and killed and impoverished, right? Is it the people who the police are basically deputizing racial terrorists and white supremacists, including the former president of the United States, calling them out by names, saying to stand down and stand by, right? Is it that, right? Or is it desperate people in the context of massive state-sanctioned violence being so frustrated that a quick mark gets burned in Baltimore or Ferguson, or something happens in Brooklyn Central, and we completely change the narrative instead of focusing on why is there this kind of outrage? And this goes back to the commissions, the Kerner commissions, the McCone commission. We've been doing this for over 50 years, right? So I do think that it is hard to see. George Orwell said the hardest thing to do is to see what is right in front of your nose, what is right in front of your face. So sometimes people get very angry. And look, the best sellers that we saw last summer, it's both a product of a social movement, but it's what King called materialism. But what King didn't call it, and we can call it because we're the scholars, neoliberalism, right? Neoliberal democratic capitalism. So when we think about neoliberalism, what does that mean? It's a big word for right now, as liberalism became more modern or postmodern, it's the privatization of public space and public goods and public wealth for the few. It's the militarization of that. It's the punishment of people who are Black, who are immigrants, who are queer, who are Muslims, who are Jews, okay? That's what neoliberalism is, right? It's the transporting of wealth globally away from the many into the hands of the few, right? And so from that perspective, we have to understand it's going to be hard to change this. That's what we're up against. It's going to be hard to change this. You can't get gun safety legislation here. You can't get voting rights legislation here. So there is no citizenship and dignity for really anyone here, but certainly for Black people. We know it, we feel it, we taste it, because we've been at the precipice. We've been almost there where we could taste citizenship after racial slavery. We could taste citizenship after the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment. And some of them, as we read with Toni Morrison and we read with Ida B. Wells, sometimes we practiced a fugitive kind of democracy and citizenship where we were citizens, right? Amongst ourselves, right? But people, a lot of times they punctured that bubble, right? Isabel Wilkerson teaches us that in Warmth of Other Suns, right? We went to other places. We created Chicago's Bronzeville, right? And Harlem and places in the South. Annette Gordon Cooper has Annette Gordon-Reed has a beautiful new book called Juneteenth that's coming out May. And she's from Conroe, Texas, near where Dr. Jones is from. And she talks about being in Conroe, Texas, and what that meant. And we created dignity and citizenship for ourselves in small archipelagos, right? But this is a bigger system than that. So I do think that we have done and followed up on what that question is saying, but we have to remember it's going to take more than conventional politics. Right. It's going to take more than conventional politics to get us freedom. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Lowe, do you have a response to that question as well?
Yeah, I have to add that moving beyond statements, because I was just talking to one of my graduate students about this, how do we move beyond the statements? And I always think about in terms of corporations, in terms of higher ed, even in terms of just organizations and policies, because I'm coming from a policy perspective, and just thinking about, so we're going to put out a statement that says we value Black lives, but what are you doing in terms of your policies and corporate policies to actually hire more diverse groups, to hire Black people, and don't just say that we don't have a talented recruitment pool. What do your efforts actually look like to go into these communities to find these talented people? What is this internal structural, the structural ways in which organizations are working to kind of maintain these systems, to maintain keeping people out? And so that's kind of, we had this discussion, and it's just are organizations really doing that? Are they going to just say, oh yeah, we value these things, but we're going to keep things, keep the status quo? So I think to move beyond the statements, organizations are just going to have to get real, and to actually do that work, and to be held accountable, and to not just put up statements because we're afraid we're going to lose the Black dollar at the end of the day. So that's just kind of my short, sweet thoughts on that.
Thank you both for answering that. What are some of the more effective ways that allies can engage in advocacy in micro and interpersonal interactions?
So
yeah, you can
go. I'll be quick. In terms of allies engaging in advocacy, and again, these are conversations that I have in just personal spaces, and just thinking about, again, the burnout that comes with activism, especially if you're Black during these times, and just doing the work. So I think there's a level of learning and autonomous learning that is necessary, in terms of, I had a lot of people come to me and say, hey, what resources should I be looking into, and all of these different things. But even as a scholar, and just thinking about, there are a lot of people who are educated, uneducated. There's Google. There are ways to find information and to be engaged. But I think it takes real critical reflection and real just unlearning. And I'm not sure that everyone is ready to do that, even allies, and to step back and to listen. I think that's definitely important. And so I would say, just for allies, again, just making sure that you're doing that critical reflection, critical learning, being able to step back and to listen to what others in the movement are trying to accomplish and how they're trying to accomplish it. And I say those are some of the best ways to engage. And then, yeah.
Dr. Joseph?
Yeah, I think what allies can do is really, invest their resources into this, and that means skin in the game. It can be everything from financial resources to your time, leveraging your networks. If you are going to connect with your friends who are Black, who are colored, make sure that they're going to be compensated for their time. Make sure that you're doing something to invest in them, and not just utilize them as some kind of sponge where you're constantly taking from, and you think that somehow they just miraculously replenish what you take. Because even our high school students, our elementary school students, our college students are forced to do this extra work and extra labor. Not to mention even those of us who are in this space where, yeah, we receive a salary. But as you all know, now that you're in the space of higher ed, I've been in this space for 30 years. you're putting a lot more in than they're compensating you for, and that's what you're seeing. So there is a tax, and I think some people might think, well, if somebody is a well-known Black person in higher education, somehow they don't pay it. They pay it the biggest. They pay the biggest ones. And certainly there's going to be a few who are getting sort of. People might say, well, you need to pay that back, and I won't mention any other names because they're getting their own sort of multi-million-dollar dividends, right? But most people aren't. Most aren't. That's like a handful of people across the whole country. So, I think that allyship is, leveraging your networks to invest and elevate, Black people who are in your network. Black women, Black men who are in your network. I think that's a big way to start, and not just sort of utilize their knowledge and then go show off in your own network. Yeah.
I definitely want to second your comment on compensation and just
yeah, no, absolutely. This is work, and it's not at the time I did a bunch of free stuff. I did compensated stuff as well, but I know there's some folks who just refuse to do stuff that is uncompensated because they feel it's just unbelievably just disrespectful and stuff. And I completely understand that. I completely understand this. So I think that is one thing that we don't do. We don't compensate and think of this as real work. And as all of us know, the years of expertise that we've had to invest in being able to be part of this, we know the work it takes. All of us have gone to graduate school and done all kinds of stuff, and you're researching and publishing and speaking, and it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lifetime vocation. So people, we should be compensated, and Black thought leaders as well. But people should be investing in young people. They should be investing just in the Black community. Yeah.
I think another thing along those same lines is we're talking about activism, and we're talking about advocacy. The concept of, well, not the concept, just being tired and being burnt out. It's a thing. It's real. And whether you're watching One Night in Miami and seeing Malcolm's just pure exhaustion, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're thinking about King being away from home all the time. He's at the Lorraine. He's smoking a cigarette. This is stressful. How do people who invest in this work, how do we overcome the trauma of of not only being on a constant moving news cycle, but also trying to help, and just every time you look up, it's like, here's something else getting piled on? How do we deal with the burnout?
Very quickly, because I know we're out of time, I'd say that you've got to be committed to your own wellness. I would tell people in the space, don't smoke, don't drink, get 8 hours of sleep. I practice yoga. I'm a Christian, but I practice yoga and I meditate, every day. I'm a dad, so I try to be as healthy as possible. I think about what I eat and what I put into my body. So I'd say all of those we have to be especially sensitive and in tune to, much more so than working, 16 or 18-hour days and sort of grinding yourself into dust. Because for those of us who are parents, we want to be there for our children. We want to live, but I'd say do as healthy a wellness choice as possible, in terms of what you eat, and again, put all poisons, pass on that, that are not good for you at all, So I think that's how you start, and then God willing, you'll just be in the game much longer and in a healthier way.
And I just want to add something, add a few things in terms of just self-care isn't always going to look like just a spa day or just something that traditionally people would think of. If it's taking 5 minutes out of your day to do some meditation with the Spotify app, that's fine. If it's intentionally saying that I'm going to get my 8 hours of sleep, or I'm going to wake up early in the morning so that I'm able to read my 5 pages of my book. Just finding small little ways throughout the day to keep that kind of mentality and to take care of yourself and to manage it and making it a priority. I would say prioritizing it. And not everyone's going to have the privilege of doing that because, again, we're from all different backgrounds, but just making sure that you're finding time to prioritize that mental health component. And I think that's the best thing that you can do in terms of thinking about that mental health.
Thank you both for checking in and responding to that question. In the chat, we've dropped a link to our Qualtrics survey so that you can give us some feedback on tonight's event. We really appreciate you all for attending. We want to thank Dr. Joseph and Dr. Lowe for their time this evening. Thank you all for being here this evening. Please fill out that Qualtrics survey so that we can share that with our various offices to just take that feedback and utilize it so that we can continue to put things on like this. We want to thank the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, the LBJ School, University Housing and Dining, Emily Dunkley for putting this together, and Anayeli Calixto, one of our graduate assistants over in Housing and Dining, and you all for tuning in this evening. You can find Dr. Lowe and Dr. Joseph out there. You can look them up, send them an email if you got questions that you weren't able to answer or get answered tonight. You can find them. But other than that, you all have a great evening. Take care of yourselves and just take care of yourself. Take care.